Okay, so in today's video, you're going to learn why the emergency fund is one of the pillars of sound personal finance and understand the factors that go into determining just how much you should save. So we're talking about cash here, right? You might be thinking, do you really need to do that? Do you really need cash? Why can't you just rely on your credit card for emergencies? Shouldn't I just focus on, investing instead? How do you even know what the right amount of cash is to have on hand? We get these questions all the time, and I've asked myself the same things as well. In almost all financial situations, you do need an emergency fund, and you should absolutely not rely upon credit cards for this purpose. In terms of how much to have on hand, that gets a little more complicated. So an emergency fund, it's money set aside as cash to cover unexpected expenses before allocating money for anything else. This is the first step in building your financial future, even before you start investing, as it's really hard to predict when or if you'll need money to cover your living expenses, largely because this cash reserve is specifically for the unexpected. Even the most careful planners can lose their job or go through unusual healthcare costs that put them in a tight financial position. So you definitely don't want your emergency cash tied up in the market. Imagine if you needed access to your money ASAP, or the market dipped 10% the day before an emergency hit, right? You just never know when you'll have an unexpected emergency, and that's why you have to start with an emergency fund before even thinking about investing. Okay, so now that I've convinced you why this is important, let's talk about how much cash you should keep on hand. For most people, if they were to lose their job, they would need enough money to cover the living expenses for 3 to 6 months. And that is generally enough of a cushion to give you time to find a new job or cover any unexpected expense without derailing the rest of your financial life. Ideally, your living expenses are below what you previously earned. Now, beyond the 3 to 6 month starting point, the actual amount that you should hold in an emergency fund comes down to 4 factors: age, profession, investable assets, and unexpected responsibilities. Age. Let's start there. In general, the older you are, the larger your emergency fund should probably be, right? Younger people tend to have lower living expenses, fewer unexpected healthcare accidents, and require less time to find new work. If you're 25 and you lose your job, you likely have a better shot at finding a replacement job than someone, let's say, 30 years older. Youth really is on your side here. So if you lose your job and you're older, you should expect it to take you longer to find that new job, right? This then would build the case for holding more cash in your emergency fund the older you are to potentially cover a longer period without income. Now, I'm not trying to take a shot at any boomers out there, so don't skip this video just yet. Second, profession. If you lose your job and your job is in super high demand, the lower the size of the emergency fund you actually probably need. For example, a highly experienced software engineer is not going to struggle to find a new job pretty quickly, so the need for the standard 3 to 6 months is a little bit lower. The length of time you may be out of work will likely vary with the geography, industry, and the level you've attained in your profession. In many cases, senior management positions take longer to actually find a replacement job than individual contributor positions. If you aren't very flexible about where you want to work, you may need a longer time period to find that new work. Each of these factors can impact the length of time it could take you to replace your income, and as a result, should affect the size of your emergency fund. Investable assets. One of the most important factors to consider when deciding how much money to put aside for an emergency fund is the magnitude of your investable assets. Yet so many people ignore this factor, and investable assets above a certain level can eliminate the need for a full 3 to 6 months that you need. Above a certain threshold, you can likely afford to withstand a significant loss and still have enough money to cover anything unforeseen that might come your way. However, that level rarely completely eliminates the need for an emergency fund. It's most common to need your emergency funds in tough economic times, which are often correlated with significant stock market declines as well. And as I've told you before, that's the exact opposite of the time that you want to sell your investments, so you don't want to rely on this too much. In fact, you may want to have some extra cash to invest when the market is down, right? So if you don't want to rely upon selling your investments in times of need, how can you use your investment account here? Well, if you have an investment account from which you can borrow in the form of a short-term loan, you might be able to rely upon this, especially during a low interest rate environment. Some investment platforms allow you to borrow up to 30% or so of your investment account balance for a reasonable interest rate. Again, this doesn't completely eliminate the need for the emergency savings, but you can reduce your need to rely upon it here. There's no rule of thumb to lean on here, but generally, you shouldn't consider this until your investment account represents at least 5 times the total amount of money that you might need in the short term for an emergency. Ideally, you have so much of a cash buffer that the emergency fund is just not needed as much. Unexpected responsibilities. Your extended family's financial needs can play a big role in determining the size of the emergency fund that you actually set aside as well. Now, when I refer to extended family, I just mean those in your family you are willing to help in a financial crisis or that may ask you for help at some point. The more money your family has, the less likely they will need to call upon you in an emergency. And relatively speaking, the less money you might need to set aside. In other words, if your parents or siblings have very little savings, then setting aside 6 months of living expenses might not be enough. But even if your family is reasonably comfortable, that doesn't mean you should allocate less than 6 months of living expenses to your rainy day fund, right? You probably don't want to have to go to your parents to ask for money, even if you lose your job, even if you theoretically could. Another factor to consider is the psychological benefit here. I know many people that derive tremendous psychological benefit from the existence of emergency savings. They rest easier at night with the peace of mind knowing that their family has a safety net under them. If this is you, consider prioritizing this factor first and foremost. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of how to think about your emergency fund and what factors might go into how much you should actually have. I'm Tony from Wealthfront. Thanks for watching. Take care.